Flume of the pustral flumes. To the city of Mewetto on its mighty stone hill came Flume of the pustral flumes. He arrived by bus, meeting him at the station where his distant cousins Borad and Milar, an older married couple with a house in the heart of the city's old district. This was all once a castle, Borad explained to Flume of the pustral flumes. His hand swept the surrounding buildings as they drove along in an open vehicle. "Are you hungry?" Milar asked their guest. "I ate on the bus," Flume of the pustral flumes answered. He was a large boy, dressed all in red denim with a flowery rag about his throat. "That can't be sufficient," Milar shook her head. "What did they feed you, packaged crackers?" The pustral flume smiled. "Essentially," he told Milar. "Got some excellent gauche at the house," Borad informed him. "Makes a good sandwich." "Yes," Milar agreed. "As soon as we get home, I'll make you a nice gauche sandwich, and then tonight we'll have a feast, the whole family." "Oh, I don't want you to make a big production," Flume begged. "This is really more of a fact-finding trip than anything else." "What is you trying to find out?" Borad asked as he steered the crawler into a narrow alley. Flume considered. He looked over the side of the ground. Cobblestone streets, each rounded stone unique. Each one should have a name, he thought. "More about our family," he told his cousin. "Too bad my father's not still alive," Borad lamented without a trace of sadness in his working man's voice, the voice of a man pushed into familiar communication with humanity's middling bulk. "I could have told you all about his father and his brothers, how each one moved to a different part of the kingdom. My father and your grandfather," he pointed to Flume, "they were brothers." "Yes," Flume nodded. He knew this already. He had wanted to visit his relatives in Mitheringham on the River Creef, but since that region's annexation by the Punchers, there had been no word from them. Flume only felt dismay at the lost opportunity. He had no desire to travel into danger. Bad enough that he had to eat gauche sandwiches. To his surprise, however, the sandwiches were good. "The flesh is so tender," he remarked. "All the gauche I've ever had was tough." "That's store-bought gauche," Mila dismissed the product. "Tomorrow I'll show you where the gauche is butchered," Borad promised. Flume only smiled. "Dad, he doesn't want to see that," Nipria, Borad and Milar's youngest daughter, admonished their father. "He came to find out our political and social views. Isn't that right?" She touched Flume's arm with her little grimy finger. "Partly," Flume agreed. They were seated around the dinner table. Those that could not find a place, and there were several, as the whole family as well as a couple of the children's friends were crowded into the room, sat on chairs brought in from other parts of the house. "But also," he continued, "I want to learn more about our family's history, how we've changed over the years." "We've hardly changed at all," Borad opined, leaning back in his seat. "I remember my father telling me that his father was a great fisherman. He used to fish in the old country, and we still carry on that tradition." Borad looked about at his sons, each of whom bore the stamp of the weekend angler. "And you, Flume of the pustral flumes, do you fish?" He turned to his guest expectantly. "No, I don't," Flume answered forthrightly. He hated the whole idea. "You don't?" Borad looked stunned. "We're nowhere to fish?" "No, it's not that." "Do you like hunting?" asked one of the sons. The fat one, not the retarded one, interrupted to ask. "No, I don't see the point." Glances were passed around the table like curiosities in show and tell. "You guys don't understand, Flume of the pustral flumes," Nipria remonstrated. "He's sensitive. He doesn't go in for all that outdoorsy stuff." She turned to her cousin. "I bet you like boys. Am I right?" Storage. Drawer and Louisa, married 9 years, had not been through their rented storage space in more than that amount of time. "I inherited the space, so to speak, from my uncle," Drawer thought as he fitted his key into the padlock. "It's like opening King Tut's tomb," Louisa enthused. "It's nothing like that," Drawer retorted in his mind, throwing up the door with care. He didn't want to hurt his back, ever. But in a way it was like opening King Tut's tomb. Containers and objects shoved about. There was no way of knowing if this was really how they had left things, if looters hadn't visited their space at some time over the years. "God, what a mess," Drawer commented, as much to himself as his wife, for whom the prospect before them remained exciting. "I can't wait to see what we've got here," Louisa cried. "I pride myself on my memory," Drawer thought. "There will be no surprises." He was proven wrong, however, within a couple of minutes of moving into the space. There, in a box on top of a stack of other boxes, was a ceramic planter in the shape of a humorously sad dog. "Where did this come from?" he wondered aloud as he investigated the interior of the dog's hollow back. It contained a block of green florist foam. I didn't even use it for real flowers, Louisa commented as she... They didn't even use it for real flowers, Louisa commented as she examined the drawer's find. Who is they? Drawer asked. Well, I assume your uncle and one of his various wives. Yeah, Drawer agreed. I can't imagine Uncle Fritz. He stopped short. The sound of drums and an electric guitar had suddenly erupted from one of the adjacent storage spaces. The one on the left, Drawer decided. Is it a band practicing? Louisa wondered. I've heard about bands doing that. People too poor to afford a regular practice space. Where do they get the power from? Batteries? Drawer looked at his wife as if contemplating undreamt of depths of stupidity. Listen, he suddenly commanded. Do you hear someone singing? He moved to the corrugated steel wall separating his space from the next. Could be a two-person band, speculated Louisa, like the Black Keys. Has everyone forgotten the white stripes so soon, Drawer thought. But then he realized that if he made this observation aloud, he really should reference suicide instead. It would make him sound much more culturally grounded. Yeah, no bass, he agreed with Louisa. Of course, it could be a third person singing. Possibly, Drawer concurred, but that guitar isn't too complex to play and sing along with at the same time. Louisa wondered how Drawer could know that. Perhaps his time volunteering at the local radio... Perhaps his time volunteering at the college radio station had taught him such things? What is he singing? Drawer's eyebrows were two wrecked autos hooked by their bumpers. Is it a he? Sounds like he's singing Inflammation Jets. Is it a he? A pounding, this time from the storage space on the opposite side from the music side, began. Drawer, followed by Louisa, hurried to put his ear against that wall. They had to crawl over bags of old army uniforms. As they reached the wall, the pounding ceased. They could hear her voice shouting. What's he saying? Louisa asked. Is it a he? Drawer wanted to demand with manly sarcasm. He's complaining about the noise. Drawer suddenly thought of something. I think they woke him up, he concluded. You mean someone is living in there? Living in there more precisely. Is that legal? Well, Drawer began to think about the whole storage unit complex as a labyrinth of spurious apartments. Mr. Franklin, if you really didn't need to know exactly how Benjamin Franklin was brought through the layered gelatin of time to meet with me in this, the latter half of my life, then you should consult District Outlay Paper number 35. I don't have the space-time to explain the mechanics of the process of the mechanics in the here and now. In a like manner, understand that feelings and thoughts are two different ways of describing the same thing. I reject that theory, Franklin told me after I had helped him to buckle himself in. We were sitting in a car rented for the occasion, a new Buick LeSabre. I thought he would appreciate something American-made, although personally I prefer all things German. I did too at once, I answered, fitting the key into the ignition switch, simply because I exalted reason over emotion. But once I realized that reason is not the equivalent of thought, but yet another purely human construct, which is the basis of how the universe works, Franklin interrupted to counter my argument. Insofar as it tallies with mathematics, I agreed, but there are no objective numbers or sequence in the everyday world which you and I deal with and live in. Very well. Franklin sounded eager to move on. Let us speak of how this Buick LeSabre works. What is this curious key you've inserted into this equally curious lock? Watch me closely, I instructed. I turn the key, and an electrical impulse is sent to the engine, igniting the explosive fuel in a controlled setting, forcing the drive shaft to turn as I direct. It's what we call horsepower. And how many horses worth of power are out there? The fat old man gestured toward the hood. Oh, many hundreds, I guessed. We also have essentially slave power as well, for we have at our disposal many comforts and luxuries. I turned on the air conditioning. Frigid air! Franklin exclaimed. It was a necessity as well, for the day was hot and the man from the 18th century was unfamiliar with deodorants. Supposedly body odor was a turn-on back then, read Napoleon's letters to Josephine. And, I added, turning another switch, music. The mighty dolorous drone of Tangerine Dream issued from the speakers. You call this music? Franklin grumbled as I put the car in gear. I rolled my eyes. It was going to be like riding with my father. I remember trying to get him to listen to Stairway to Heaven once. Everything was fine until Robert Plant started singing. He did seem to like the first half of Metallica's Orion, though. I thought we'd head for the local library first. Sound good? I asked. Franklin shrugged his shoulders. You're driving, he said. I'm just along for the ride. I stopped at a four-way stop. You know, I expected a lot more from you, I admitted. I took Jules Verne for a drive last week, and he was most rewarding as a participant, asking questions about how everything worked and telling me amusing, relevant stories. Well, he's French. Franklin pointed out. What do you expect? I love the French, lived among them for nearly 10 years, but let's face it, they are temperamentally diametrical to us frontiersmen. Hadn't Buick been a Frenchman and a frontiersman, I wondered? I know Cadillac had been a Frenchman, but Buick, who was he? Why don't you look him up? Franklin asked after I started talking to myself. Look him up in your wonderful Wikipedia on your godlike internet. His tone was cynical, his attitude belittling. I turned onto another street. When we get to the library, I said through my teeth, I want you to look at how many biographies of you there are and compare that number to those of Jules Verne. You'll see why so much is expected of you. Hell, boy, if you're going to judge that way, why don't you invite Hitler along next time? Weil meine Deutsch ist nicht so schön, ich sagte. Button, Queen Carlotta. Although the owner had warned everyone not to expect big discounts as he prepared to close his business after nearly 30 years, I went to the store on its last day expecting big discounts anyway. The place was called Garbage Man's Asylum and was the preeminent novelty store in town. All your hippest cultural merchandise was there, from life-size Princess Leia cardboard cutouts to boxes of chocolate-covered ants, from bar stools shaped like hands to marijuana-smoking paraphernalia. I wandered around and found nothing that I really wanted, especially not at these prices. Boy, he wasn't kidding, I told myself. It was then that I decided to steal something. It's his last day in business, I observed. Little likelihood of him pressing charges if I get caught. But I wouldn't get caught. I was a pretty good shoplifter. The trouble was I didn't want to be too reckless, and there wasn't anything that really stood out as something that I had to have. If I wanted one thing, I wanted a dozen, and there was no way I was stealing a dozen items. African thumb piano? Beatles playing cards? Pee Wee Herman watch? What I really wanted was a bunch of posters. He had so many that I wanted. Rock and roll bands and movie stars. But posters are hard to steal. I stole a Kiss poster years ago by sticking it down my pants leg, but it got bent. No, it would have to be something small, something symbolic of my appreciation of the store, something to remember it by. In the back of the store I found what I wanted. It was a block of foam covered with buttons and badges. I turned it about and selected one bearing the image of Queen Carlotta, the villain played by the revolting Edith Massey in the equally revolting Desperate Living. It's my favorite John Waters film, even though Divine is not in it. Many people were in the store. It was easy to carry the button away and put it in my pocket. As I headed out of the store, I saw the owner, a rich hippie with glasses and dreadlocks, talking with a couple of people. I hadn't seen him actually in the store in years. He was usually too busy enjoying himself traveling the world. He didn't know me. But I remember when he first opened and the wife of a legendary local musician told him that the Lord had told her that he wouldn't be successful unless he removed all of the occult items from his inventory. Time has shown who was correct. Outside, the sun was emerging from behind the remains of last night's rain clouds. The sidewalks were still soaked. It was going to be a muggy day. I pinned Queen Carlotta to my shirt and headed for a place of refuge, the university library. On the way, I tried smiling at people, happy and confident with my new button, but the result was the same. Nobody was intimidated. What would I have said if someone had noticed me and my button anyway? What would be the point in talking to some random stranger? They say Neil Young met his longtime friend and producer David Briggs while hitchhiking, but they never mentioned the 10 million who found nothing but boredom out on the road. On the third floor of the library are the books on films. That is, the books about film. Books on film are films, and you need special permission to watch those. I found a book about the work of John Waters. There, on page 17, and again on page 27 and 32, was Edith Massey. Not quite the picture I had on my button, but that was good. It wouldn't do for them to be the same now that I had thought about it. I tore two of the pictures out, and after swiping a couple of paperclips from the circulation desk, I attached them to my shirt, one in the front and one in the back. Of course, I waited until I was outside the library. I didn't want any trouble from the kid with the seeing eye dog in training. Heading back to my car, I noted carefully the reactions of the people I met. The result was not significantly different from before. In time, however, people pinned my picture torn from the back of my books on their shirts. I was asked to comment on this trend and could only laugh, remembering now of the day Garbage Man's Asylum closed down. There's a bar there now, catering to students, flashing Daddy's credit card. You know what you are, Lance, a friend of mine asked me the other day. Know what? A misogynist, he said. I just laughed, not remembering what that word meant. Shoecase. It's empty. Outside the entrance to the temple was a rack for the shoes of worshippers. On the day that I visited, this rack was empty. It seems that no one is here, I told my companions. On the contrary, Fat Boy, standing at the doors and peering through the crack between them, announced, I see people milling about. I found it hard to believe that people were milling about in a temple, even when dedicated to the bumblebee god Ampersobel. I checked. Those are priests, I told Fat Boy. Do they not have to take their shoes off? It's not that. I shook my head. They don't have feet. I pulled my pants up with my thumbs inside the waistband as I inhaled deeply. There will be no contamination from them, I declared. Amber Sobel, beloved of the wandering honey smearers, appeared to the assembled fat boys and neuteroids, prayerlings and mistresses. Her specialized mouth, a home wood shop of barbed tools and coarse hair like a denda, dripped with sacred goo as she addressed the crowd. Catch every drop, someone in the excited front row cried. I nodded to one of my companions, who had pantomimed the act of hefting a bucket. As he disappeared into a nearby shop, I found a bench around the side of the temple, away from the throng, where I could work on a poem detailing my feelings about things like bumblebees, buckets, and bedeviled brogans. I'm trying to change. I'm trying to become the kind of person who doesn't give a shit about anything, because if you don't care, if you don't have any worries, regrets, or needs, then you are automatically happy. I want to be happy, of course, but more than that, I want to feel ecstatic all the time. I wish I didn't worry about how my work is received by some potential reader. Then I could just write whatever comes out of my head, but I've always got you in mind. I wish I could just write what Andy Rooney called pretentious nonsense. A series of guest performers took turns on the album in my head. King Kong on the Moon. The novel will develop into something I cannot predict. What are you doing sitting here? A familiar voice, much like that of a young Ray Walston, but without the snap, asked. Don't you know all the action is around the front? It was Jerry. I invited him to sit down, making room on the bench as I did so. Thanks. So you needed my help. Well, I guess I do, now that I think about it, I answered. How did you know? Jerry shrugged his non-existent shoulders. I read what you've written so far. Pretty bad, huh? As usual, you have some good stuff mixed in with the dreck. Yeah, but overall it's pretty bad compared to the previous section of the book. Jerry held out his hands in a mollifying gesture. Don't worry, he said. I'm here to help. Everything's going to be all right from now on. You'll just have some minor rewriting to do after you get done. I hate rewriting, I grumbled. I looked away at the bees' transit among the dandelions. You're going to have to develop some of the habits of a professional writer. Let's not get carried away, I protested. If and when someone agrees to pay me for what I write, I may or may not accept the yoke of professionalism. Until then, look, Jerry interrupted, pointing at the grass. All of the bees were swarming away, this accompanied by a burst of noise from the other side of the temple. Within seconds, my entourage came pouring around to meet me. Fat Boy, carrying a poorly maintained bucket of translucent fluid, began ranting. Master, the bee god! Hold it! I ordered, throwing up a hand. This is Jerry Lancaster, I indicated my imaginary friend. Now that he's back, I don't need any of you, so you can just go on back to whatever you were doing before. What about this stuff? Fat Boy jostled his burden. You can drink it for all I care. Riddle. Time in the machine. Didn't you say something about King Kong on the Moon? Jerry asked as we walked towards the transcapsule. Yes, but for the purposes of copyright infringement avoidance, let us call the giant ape in question Gigantogorilla. Jerry frowned. I don't like that. It's clumsy. I don't much like it either, I admitted, but I can't think of anything better at the moment. It's basically the same idea as Kong, but after a series of adventures here on Earth, he gets into the moon. How? I put my money into the vector box on the side of the transcapsule initiation platform. I don't know, I complained. Maybe he takes a transcapsule, a giant one. And how does he breathe on the moon? Jerry followed me into the capsule after I opened the door. He's too big to move around inside of one of the domed cities. You don't know that? I sat down on the stool bolted to the middle of the floor. Where am I going to sit? Jerry asked. Well, these capsules are really meant for one passenger at a time. I pointed to the placard indicating that very fact. But I'm cheap, so why don't you just sit in my lap? I don't think so, Jerry shook his head. Why don't you get out your valise and let me ride in there? I debated with myself, but not for long. The capsule will be launching soon. Okay, I agreed. Reaching into my coat for my valise, I put it on the floor beside me. Jerry stepped into it up to his nose. The capsule, with its characteristic moose and squirrel noise, began to transport us to our destination. Of course, we couldn't see anything of the journey. Transcapsules do not have windows. Now go on with your description and explanation of the Gigantogorilla idea. I really don't like that name, Jerry replied. How about Macro Monkey? I think that's been used, I replied after a brief think. You sure? I think so. I think Michael Crichton used it in one of his last books. What, Congo 2? No, I think it was Rising Simeon. Jerry wrinkled his mouth. He couldn't purse his lips as he had none to purse. I will put my mind to work on a better name, he said. As will I promised. All right, go on, Jerry urged. That's it, just King Kong on the moon or Giant Gorilla on the moon, whatever. It's not much of an idea. It doesn't have to be. You can easily build a movie around a little idea like that. Yeah, but you're not making a movie, you're writing a book. I agree, but all of Michael Crichton's films started out as books, and all of your books started out as dreams of films. Dreams were at one time the ultimate metaphor for life until films came along. I postulated as the capsule came to rest at our destination. The green light came on over the door. I opened it, stepped out. Where are we? Jerry asked as he handed me my valise. The moon, where else? Jerry laughed. Will King Kong in substance to be attacking soon? Who said he was going to attack? Maybe he's here to perform some service to mankind. Like what? Well, let's see how he copes with environmental conditions first. You just make it up as you go, don't you? As an accusation, it was pretty feeble, but I took it to heart. Okay, Jerry, I told my friend. I'll make a deal with you. I'll do some planning ahead if you play Scrabble with me. She hid the Q tile. The participants in the Scrabble game were Jerry, Homegrown Malone, Marissa of the Macaque People, and myself, Toadskabode. We drew tiles to see who would go first. Marissa won and put down the word R. Jerry smiled at this, but I caught his eye. No, my eyes said, no sniggering. The macaque woman will be treated with respect. While we waited for Homegrown Malone to take his turn, I reflected on my earlier conversation with Jerry. What are the macaque people doing on the moon? Jerry had asked. My theory is that word of their existence got out, and as a result their delicately balanced way of life became threatened. Thus they and their village were transferred to the moon. Here, because of the unique arrangement of the residential domes, together with the easygoing, tolerant nature of the moon society, they can be safe. How did they move them and their village to the moon? Ha! Perhaps that's what the giant gorilla is for. I pounced on the idea, wagging a finger of eurecation of Jerry. Jerry frowned. He wasn't impressed. By the way, he drawled, when are we going to see some sign of this monster freak? I considered. I was still considering as our guest entered our lunar accommodations. Ritual, homegrown Malone announced, placing the word on the board. Good word, I said. Malone appeared no different in any regard from the night I had met him. His monstrous frog-like visage seemed ageless. Some have theorized that his gargantuan intake of cannabis had done this to him, but I suspect that he had always looked this way, even in childhood. How's your book coming? He asked, as I scanned the board for the right place to put something down. I had the word sciatica, but I was missing a C. Slowly but surely, I answered with weary resignation. Did the smoke help any? Yes, it did, as a matter of fact. Come on, put something down. Jerry rolled his hand around. Fine. I put down cast. I was the scorekeeper. Jerry had his word down before I had written my points. He put down the word rennet. Good word, I enthused. What's that? Marissa asked. I explained. It's an enzyme used for making cheese. Malone frowned. Cheese, he repeated sourly, his innumerable tiny teeth visible at the corners of his elongated mouth. Don't like cheese, I laughed. No, the pot proselytizing monster returned. It smells like feces. I don't like the smell of pot, Marissa voiced her opinion. People who say that usually have bad associations with it, Malone told her. Meaning what? Meaning it's not the pot itself that you think smells bad, but the people you associate with the pot, or the experiences you've had with those people that you think smell bad. I think I know my own mind, Marissa insisted in her husky little girl's voice. Do you think you know what word you're going to put down? Jerry snapped. Marissa said nothing in response, but flashed her eyes at Jerry and returned to her cogitation. Jerry flashed his eyes too, only at me. I could read their import. I hate Scrabble, they said. The game proceeded in this tension-filled manner until the end. I won, followed by Homegrown Malone, Jerry, and Marissa, in that order. After I put down my last tile, the word was igloo, everyone revealed his remaining tiles. Wait a minute, I barked. Where's the cue? The game is void, Malone adjudicated. Remark, overheard with some rarity. Jerry and I were standing in line at the Lunar Cinema waiting to see King Kong and the Moon. Told you, I said to Jerry, when I overheard one of our fellow patrons remark to his companion, they said the bananas are energetic. I took out my little notebook and wrote this down. You going to use that? Jerry asked. You never know, I answered, tucking the book back into my shirt pocket. The man who had made this remark, along with the man to whom it had been made, sat together some dozen rows behind Jerry and me. Ordinarily, they would have maintained a seat's distance between themselves for homophobic propriety's sake, but as the cinema was so crowded, they were forced to sit side by side. At least this made passing the popcorn easier, though Lincoln, the banana remarker. "We should each have gotten a bucket," said Monty to his friend. "This looks gay." "How much popcorn are you planning on eating?" Lincoln asked. "I'm just about sick already." "Why is it people always finish the popcorn before the movie's even started?" "And why do you have to worry about people thinking you're gay?" Lincoln wondered, thinking back to a time some years before. He and Monty had both been employed at the pencil factory at the time. A new employee had been introduced to both of them, and as they were working with him, they had somehow gotten on the topic of cross-dressing. Lincoln had mentioned that he and Monty had been to a gay club for a show of female impressionists. "But we're not gay," Monty had interjected before turning to Lincoln and snapping, "God damn! That would have been the first thing I would have said." "I'm not," Monty protested. Lincoln let it go and turned to his attention to the screen. The giant gorilla, equipped with a special breathing apparatus, had been transported to the moon on the back of a genetically engineered space turtle. "His immense size protects him from the rigors of outer space," explained one of the scientists working on the project. His interlocutor, a big man in a dark suit, listened as he observed Kong on the laboratory's monitor. "Is that?" I wondered, mouth agape, pointing at the screen. "It surely looks like him," Jerry agreed. "That's Clark Seville," Monty whispered to his friend. "Oh," Lincoln nodded. He had heard the name, but never knew who Clark Seville was. "I thought he was black," he whispered back after a few seconds. Monty glanced at Lincoln. Was he kidding? "What made you think that?" he couldn't resist asking. Lincoln shrugged his shoulders. "I don't know. Something I read." Monty grabbed the popcorn. "At least he's not gay, right?" Lincoln needled his friend. He snatched a handful of popcorn out of the bucket between Monty's legs and determined that it would be his last. Monty wondered whether it would make any difference to Lincoln whether or not Clark Seville was black. "Of course it would," he answered himself, reaching for his immense container of soda. I smiled and shook my head as I watched Seville ordering people about and shouldering his way through a crowd of bystanders. How many people up on the screen or down in the audience knew what I knew, that Clark Seville had once been a bear-like creature, and then a woman, before taking on that manly, cinematic hero form? "I wonder where Alex Spaghetti is," Jerry whispered. I raised my eyebrows. It was a good question. Maybe if we kept watching, we'd find out. "I wish you'd stop calling him Kong," one of the scientists pleaded with Seville. The big man only stared at the scientist. A slight tilt of his head was all the clue we had that he was intrigued by the entreaty. "The oversized simian out there bears only a superficial resemblance to the gorilla of legend," the scientist continued, tapping the monitor screen with his eyeglasses. "This is a totally original individual with distinct characteristics." Seville checked his firearm. "The people call him Kong," he rumbled. "I'm going to call him Kong."